What's good, y'all? Anderson Emerald here to talk about Quincy Wilson and his recent commitment to the University of Maryland, where he's going to be attending starting in the fall of 2026. Now, I initially was going to do like a quick initial reaction after watching the live stream yesterday, even like earlier, the next day, but I took a little time to kind of think about why he chose to go to Maryland. I know maybe even myself, I thought he may have gone somewhere else. And I don't think there's like huge, like, oh my gosh, what happened? But it is a very interesting decision. But I do think it makes very, very good sense for a few different reasons. And let me be clear before I dive into the discussion. Everything here is based on what was on the live stream, what Quincy has said, and obviously my opinion as well. So let me be clear. I'm not like getting insider information. No, this is my opinion. So first off, Quincy Wilson, one of the greatest high school athletes that we've seen in a very long time, maybe even back to, I guess, Sidney McLaughlin-Levrone or somebody else, who knows? But Quincy Wilson, he is officially committed to attend the University of Maryland starting in the fall of 2026. He already is an Olympic gold medalist as part of the 4x4 at the Paris Games last year, where he ran leadoff leg in the heats. He has broken the, high school national record in the 400 a trillion times. He also has, the world, youth records across the board in the 400. He stated a few different reasons as to why he does want to go to Maryland over some of the other schools. One specifically is that he wanted to stay close to home. So obviously he is based in Maryland. He, competes at Bullis for high school, which he'll have, one more year to compete for. He's going to be close to family. He's going to be close to friends. He's going to be in a familiar environment. Literally said that he's going to be able to get his mom's home cooking and all that.
Maryland is close to my home. It's being great to be next to my family. I can get my mom cooking. I can get everything. I can just enjoy the family. I can be able to have this DMV, and I hope I can start the legacy for this school, and I can't wait.
So I think all of that makes sense as to why he did go to Maryland, and at least the first reason, perfectly clear, and I completely agree with that. The other schools that he did have on the docket were UCLA, he had Texas A&M, he had USC, and he had South Carolina. So out of those schools, he eventually did choose Maryland. I personally thought that he may choose either USC or UCLA. UCLA was maybe, you have Rai Benjamin is training there under Joanna Hayes. I think Vernon Norwood is now training out there. I thought that would have been an interesting environment for him to get more comfortable with people that he's had some mentorship from and, great experiences with. The other thing, USC, I thought with Quincy Watts, who I'll talk about in a second as well. He's, of course, a legendary 400-meter athlete, Olympic gold medalist in 1992. I thought, okay, that'd be a great situation for Quincy to now work with Quincy in terms of that 400 connection. But again, I do think Maryland makes a lot of sense, like he said, for that explicit reason that he's closer to home and is in a more familiar environment. So the second reason, in my opinion, that Maryland makes a lot of sense is the coaching factor. Andrew Vollman is a head coach at the University of Maryland. And you may have heard about Andrew Vollman. You may, vaguely know about him. And maybe, as recent as the announcement, you know about him. But Andrew Vollman, he was one of the top 400 guys in the golden era of 400-meter sprinting. We're talking about the late 80s all the way to the mid-1990s, right? Guys like Butch Reynolds, Steve Lewis, Danny Everett, Michael Johnson, Quincy Watts. Like that era, Andrew Vollman came up and, was consistent during that era. He competed and won gold medals as part of the 4x4 in 1988 in Seoul and in 1992 in Barcelona at the Olympics. And he ran on the 4x1 in 1991 at the Tokyo World Champs and got a gold medal in 1993 as the leadoff leg for the world record 4x4 team. Andrew Vollman passing off to Quincy Watts, to Butch Reynolds, to Michael Johnson to get the still standing world record in the 4x4. Vollman is arguably the best USA 4x4 leadoff in history. Arguably. Let me be clear. Arguably. The point is, Andrew Vollman is a very, very experienced 400-meter athlete that, that's why I said, like, okay, Quincy Watts in USC, but you do get someone in whatever equivalent you want to provide in Andrew Vollman at the University of Maryland. So I think this is going to be a very great move for Quincy to be training under Andrew Vollman. And he even mentioned it a little bit in his interview.
And how excited are you to work with Coach Vollman?
I'm super excited. I can't wait. I'm ready right now.
But this coaching factor, I'm going to come back to this in a second because I think there's a bigger layer to this as to why Quincy did choose to go to Maryland. So we'll circle back to coaching in a second. But the next thing as to why I think Maryland was a good idea is because Quincy now has the opportunity to almost become the face of the program. You can look at all the records and all the stats and all that. Obviously, no one's like looking at Maryland, forget even 400, just like a powerhouse track school, especially when you compare it to the likes of a Texas A&M, to a USC, to a South Carolina, right? Like those are schools that are in contention for team titles, many years. But I do think that Maryland provides that opportunity for Quincy to be that quote unquote face of the school, to represent Maryland, to almost like bring up the program to, more recognition, more status.
Be able to have this DMV, and I hope I can start the legacy for this school, and I can't wait.
And that doesn't mean that Maryland is all of a sudden going to be in contention to win NCAA titles or whatever. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't even think that Maryland is all of a sudden going to be in contention to be winning 4x4s, right? They still have to, though this probably will, help to increase recruitment. They still have to recruit high quality 400 guys to be able to support Quincy on a 4x4. That may or may not happen, but I'm not too concerned about that. I think Quincy, and he said it as much in his interview, that he's going to have the opportunity to represent Maryland in a way that maybe no other athlete in history has been able to do. Now, there are a few, which I'll talk about in a second, but this is going to be very good for Quincy individually, looking forward in terms of brand marketing, in terms of opportunities, in terms of sponsorships, in terms of, just that aspect of I am the one who's going to bring Maryland into the spotlight, right? That I think is a really, really good opportunity for Quincy. And if you compare it to other schools, if you went to Texas A&M or if you went to USC, there's going to be other top athletes across all events who may be just as good, if not better than Quincy, right? The 400, he would have been the best no matter what. We've already seen what he's capable of. He's competing with pros, right? Going to the Olympics and all that. But when we're talking about other events in the NCAA, Quincy won't have the opportunity to get that shine to say, I am Texas A&M, I am USC, I am South Carolina. He can do that at Maryland as part of their track and field program. That's something to really think about, and I think potentially factored in to his decision to go to Maryland. Like I said, he could be one of the greatest athletes from Maryland. There's a few athletes who Maryland has produced over the years. You have Thea LaFond, who is the Olympic gold medalist. She competed at, tons of Olympics, but Olympic gold medalist in Paris 2024. And you have Ronaldo Nehemiah, who is one of the greatest 110 hurdlers in the history of the event. He competed at the University of Maryland. So yes, not a powerhouse school, but there have been some athletes that Maryland has produced. Quincy can add his name to these, to this kind of roster of legends at Maryland. Now, the other thing here that I want to circle back to is the coaching. His individual long-term success, I think, is always going to be the priority, at least for, his family, his coach, and his immediate team around him as it stands now. Because yes, he's going to go to Maryland, and let's say he stays there for 1 year, 2 years, 4 years maximum, obviously. Then he's going to have a pro career that'll last, who knows, 10 plus years at this point. And going to Maryland to train locally, essentially, is going to probably set Quincy up for long-term success based on how we can kind of understand pro careers going. So, for example, Joe Lee has been Quincy's coach all throughout his time at Bullis, right? He has guided him, he's coached him, he's become almost like a father figure, as he said. Now that he's at Maryland, he's going to be training with Andrew Vollman. But because he'll be close to home, he may have the opportunity to still work in tandem with Coach Joe Lee. Now, whether that means, coaching or advisory or, input or whatever kind of like aspects there, that's going to be a little more feasible than if he went all the way across the country to UCLA or USC, or even if he did go down to South Carolina, right? That's going to look a little bit different, and he won't be able to have that, direct support from Coach Joe Lee. Now, he's going to be training with Coach Andrew Vollman and potentially receiving support, if not, also training from Coach Joe Lee, which will provide essentially a smoother, more gradual transition into a new training environment than just an abrupt, all right, see you later, you're on the other side of the country. And this is essentially early preparation for the professional world, especially when he leaves college, right? Specifically turning professional. One thing to think about, once he leaves college, he's going to be highly sought after when it comes to brands wanting to sign him for a pro contract, right? Obviously, he's with New Balance now under an NIL deal, but turning pro is a whole different thing. he may or may not stay with New Balance. Now, obviously, he could stay with New Balance, right? There's, a couple athletes between Vernon Norwood, Trayvon Bromell, Gabby Thomas, Sidney McLaughlin-Levrone, right? There's a couple athletes who are sprinters with New Balance, but there's a world where he does potentially sign with another brand, right? A Nike, an Adidas, or, Puma, or whoever it may be. Just as an example, obviously I'm mentioning all these different brands between Nike and Adidas. He's has an NIL deal with New Balance, and he may continue with New Balance, but look at someone like a Parker Valby as an example. Parker Valby had an NIL deal with Nike while she was in the NCAA, right? Training at Florida. Once she went pro, once she finished at Florida, she went pro and she signed with New Balance. So an NIL deal doesn't mean you're exclusively with them for the rest of your life, right? Who knows what may or may not occur. And after Parker signed with New Balance, she moved up to Boston. She left Florida and moved up to Boston. Now, she's not there anymore because of various different situations with that group. But just the idea that could be a situation that Quincy Wilson ends up with. And especially when we're talking about like Nike and Adidas, if he was to sign a pro contract with one of these other brands, that may mean he needs to change coaches and move to a completely different training group. So if he's now staying in Maryland and gets to work with Coach Andrew Vollman and Coach Joe Lee, and then slowly transition where maybe in the next year or two, while he's still at Maryland, he then is fully working with Coach Andrew Vollman, that may set him up for what a transition out of a comfortable environment may actually look like. So if he does sign with Nike and he has to move to one of their pro coaches, then that won't be so much of a shock because he's more acclimated and understands how to transition out of a comfortable environment at Bullets with Coach Joe Lee, and now is training with Andrew Vollman, and then moves on to a different coach. Obviously, this is hypothetical. We don't know what may or may not occur, but it's just the idea of the long-term strategy. How can we make sure that Quincy is prepared for whatever changes might occur throughout his career, and not make it so abrupt where it's like, all right, just throw him into the fire. Make sure that he's, growing and developing in the best way possible, as he does get older. Also, think about this little transition thing. You have an example with Arian Knighton, where out of high school, he did go pro immediately, and he was training in high school and maybe the first year out of high school with his high school coach. But then, I forget if it was 2022 or maybe 2023, he started to train a little bit with Coach Mike Holloway, still with his high school coach, but it was kind of like a support role or something like that. But then he did transition to Mike Holloway full time. And of course, that's where the majority of his career has been. So they had kind of a smooth transition where working with his high school coach, then was working with his high school coach and Mike Holloway at the University of Florida, and then working fully with Mike Holloway to make the transition a little bit smoother. Just the idea on how you can set up an athlete for longer term success doing a more strategic, transition in terms of their coaching and their situations and all of that. And the ultimate goal here is setting Quincy up for the Olympic Games in 2028. And he literally said as much in his interview after the announcement.
Represent it, be able to, in 2028, be able to represent Maryland in the country, and I'm super excited to do that.
So he'll be going to Maryland in the fall of 2026. He'll be finishing his freshman year in 2027, and that will be entering the start of a new championship cycle with the World Champs in 27, the Olympics in 2028, and the World Champs in 2029. That's his focus, an Olympic Games in 2028 in Los Angeles, essentially at home in the United States. That's only less than 3 years time from now. So how can he make sure that he's set up for success getting to those Olympics, right? That is a huge motivating factor for what they're doing now. Now, that's not to say that they're like, everything doesn't matter except the Olympic Games. No. Obviously, his education, obviously, his last year of high school, obviously, his time in college. That is very, very important. But if he does go pro, maybe after 2027, after a year at Maryland, maybe 2 years after, so looking at 2028, how can they make sure that the transition into pro is very smooth, it's very easy, it's non-disruptive, and he's avoiding like a lost year of like injury or something like that in 2028 because he had to make this drastic move that he wasn't prepared for. That's kind of what I'm thinking about as it relates to his decision to go to Maryland. And not to say that this is something that they thought through and they were like, yes, this exact thing we need to make. No, I don't know. This is just my kind of observation on what might actually make sense. And maybe this is a path that they're going down or they want to now go down you know, understanding, okay, no, we're here at Maryland. Let's make this transition a little bit smooth. So I don't know, just my thoughts. I'm excited for Quincy. I think this is a very good move for him to be at Maryland, and he has opportunity. I think regardless of where he would have gone, Quincy would have been one of the best athletes in the world. He's already cemented himself, and he's not even done with high school. Quincy is going to be a very, very big star. So shout out to Quincy Wilson. Let me know what you think about his commitment to Maryland, to compete there and go to school there. But let me know what you think. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Truly appreciate y'all. Thanks for watching.